Scorpio and Taurus never come together by chance. They sit directly opposite each other in the zodiac for a reason. This is the axis of desire and survival. One seeks emotional depth to feel alive. The other seeks stability to feel safe. When they connect, it doesn't feel like romance. It feels like attachment. And once that bond forms, it becomes very difficult to break. What develops between them isn't just emotion, it's nervous system recognition. And if you've been trying to understand why you couldn't move on from a Scorpio-Taurus connection, this is where the answer begins. What's happening goes far deeper than feelings. It's unfolding beneath the surface. Chapter 1. Why this axis feels fated. Scorpio and Taurus don't experience each other as a simple choice. They experience each other as recognition. Not because they are alike, but because they are addressing the same survival need from opposite directions. This axis is about survival at its core. Taurus asks how to stay safe in the physical world. Scorpio asks how to stay emotionally alive. Each is responding to the same instinct through a different path. When these two meet, something activates beneath conscious awareness. The body recognizes familiarity before the mind can explain it. This is why the connection often feels inevitable. Not romantic, not thrilling, but grounding and unsettling at the same time. Taurus experiences Scorpio as intensity that gives meaning to comfort. Scorpio experiences Taurus as stability that makes intensity tolerable. They are not drawn to personality traits, they are drawn to what the other regulates within them. That is what makes this axis dangerous. Once someone begins regulating your nervous system, they become extremely difficult to replace. Chapter 2. Why this connection becomes addictive. Scorpio-Taurus connections don't deepen slowly, they escalate. Not because either sign is careless, but because the bond forms at the level of regulation rather than emotion. Taurus finds stability through consistency, touch, and physical presence. Scorpio finds stability through emotional intensity and psychological closeness. When they connect, each becomes an anchor for the other in a different way. Scorpio feels calmer around Taurus, less chaotic, less reactive. The nervous system begins to slow down. For someone who lives in emotional extremes, that kind of grounding feels rare and deeply soothing. Taurus, on the other hand, feels activated, more alive, more awake. Scorpio brings depth, urgency, and meaning into a life built around predictability. What once felt safe can suddenly feel empty without that intensity. This is where addiction starts. Not through drama and not through obsession in the usual sense, but because each person begins regulating something the other struggles to create on their own. Taurus regulates safety, Scorpio regulates depth. Once that loop is in place, separation doesn't feel like heartbreak, it feels like withdrawal. The body searches for the other person just to return to baseline. This is why Scorpio-Taurus bonds are so hard to release, even when the relationship itself stops working. The attachment isn't emotional, it's physiological. And because neither sign detaches easily, the bond tends to deepen over time, rather than fade. This axis doesn't create chaos, it creates dependence. That's the part most people don't talk about, and it's why this connection can feel impossible to replace. Chapter 3. Taurus, the anchor Scorpio becomes attached to. Taurus doesn't draw Scorpio in through intensity. Taurus draws Scorpio in through presence. There is something deeply regulating about Taurus energy. It is steady, predictable, and fully embodied. Taurus moves through life slowly, deliberately, and with a strong sense of continuity. For Scorpio, who often lives in emotional extremes, this steadiness feels like relief. Taurus offers something rare, a nervous system that doesn't escalate under pressure. When Scorpio becomes emotionally activated, Taurus usually stays grounded. They don't rush to fix, analyze, or interrogate. They simply remain. That consistency creates safety. This is where Scorpio's attachment begins. Not because Taurus overwhelms them, but because Taurus doesn't disappear. Scorpio is used to intensity being the source of connection. With Taurus, connection is built through consistency. Over time, that consistency becomes irreplaceable. Taurus also anchors Scorpio in the physical world through routine shared spaces, touch, and the repetition of everyday life. For a sign that often lives internally, this embodiment feels grounding in a way that stabilizes rather than restricts. Taurus attachment is quiet. They don't dramatize loyalty. They show it through action. And Scorpio, who pays attention to behavior more than words, notices. The risk is that Taurus can become the emotional baseline Scorpio depends on, without realizing it. Taurus becomes the place Scorpio goes to regulate, rest, and reset. Once someone becomes your anchor, the thought of losing them doesn't feel like loss. It feels like destabilization. This is why Scorpio can struggle to detach from Taurus long after the relationship has changed. The bond wasn't formed through excitement. It was formed through safety. And safety, once established, is extremely difficult to release. Chapter 4. Scorpio. The depth Taurus didn't know they needed. Scorpio doesn't step into Taurus's life softly. They enter deeply. Where Taurus values continuity, Scorpio brings disruption. Not chaos for the sake of it, but emotional depth that reveals what has been buried beneath comfort and routine. Taurus often doesn't realize what's missing until Scorpio appears. Life may feel stable, productive, even successful, but Scorpio asks different questions. Questions without practical answers. Questions that demand emotional honesty. Scorpio sees past Taurus's calm surface. They sense unspoken desires, hidden fears, and emotional layers that Taurus prefers to handle quietly. And rather than avoiding them, Scorpio moves closer. At first, this can feel unsettling for Taurus. Scorpio's intensity challenges their desire for emotional simplicity, but over time that intensity begins to feel meaningful. Scorpio brings urgency into Taurus's inner world, a feeling that life isn't only about maintaining what works, but about facing what's real. Emotionally, Scorpio makes Taurus feel seen in a way they didn't know they needed. Not admired, not validated, but recognized. That recognition creates attachment. Taurus starts to link Scorpio with depth, meaning, and emotional truth. Life without Scorpio can begin to feel quieter, flatter, less alive. But Scorpio's depth isn't always gentle. Their emotional insight can feel invasive when Taurus isn't ready to be exposed. What Scorpio experiences as intimacy, Taurus can experience as pressure. This is where the axis turns volatile, because once Taurus bonds to depth, they can't undo it. Scorpio has already reshaped the emotional landscape, and Taurus, who rarely lets people in, becomes attached not just to a person, but to a version of themselves that only existed in Scorpio's presence. Chapter 5. Control, possession, and the power struggle on this axis. Scorpio and Taurus are opposites, and opposites naturally create tension. Not conflict for its own sake, but a quiet, ongoing negotiation of power beneath the surface. Taurus exercises control through presence, through consistency, and through becoming irreplaceable. Their stability becomes a silent claim. They don't need to ask for attention. It naturally gravitates toward them. Scorpio controls in a different way, through emotional insight, through withdrawal, and through knowing exactly which buttons to press without ever saying a word. They influence without force. They test, observe, and measure. Both styles of control are unconscious. Both are rooted in fear. Fear of loss, fear of instability, fear of being unseen. Problems arise when attachment moves faster than awareness. Taurus can become possessive without realizing it. Scorpio can become manipulative without intending to. Neither wants to harm the other, but both are acting from survival rather than choice. This is why the Scorpio-Taurus bond can feel addictive and volatile at the same time. There is a magnetic pull that's hard to resist, and a tension that feels impossible to escape. In healthy alignment, power is balanced. Taurus offers grounding. Scorpio offers depth. Control shifts into mutual regulation. In shadow alignment, the bond becomes a psychological chess match. Both test boundaries. Both watch reactions. Both resist fully surrendering. The lesson of this axis is never about domination. It's about recognition, knowing when to lead, when to follow, when to stay steady, and when to allow intensity to move through. The most powerful attachments are rarely balanced. They are deeply uneven, yet neither person can fully detach without feeling destabilized. Chapter 6. Sex bonding and the body-soul connection. Scorpio and Taurus connect on a level that goes beyond words. Taurus experiences life through the body, through touch, through routine and shared space. Physical presence is their language. Security, loyalty, and attachment all move through the senses. Scorpio experiences life through intensity, through emotion, through energy. They bond by reaching into the unseen layers of the psyche, by revealing what others overlook or avoid. When these two come together, the connection becomes both grounding and transformative. Sex is not just pleasure, it becomes ritual, a way of anchoring intensity into the body. Scorpio brings depth, urgency, and vulnerability. Taurus receives it and turns it into constancy, safety, and presence. Outside the bedroom, this bond continues in everyday moments. Small gestures, steady attention, and a quiet awareness of each other's rhythms create a sense of mutual regulation. But this connection isn't always easy for Taurus. Scorpio's depth can feel exposing, overwhelming, or intrusive. For Scorpio, Taurus's steadiness can feel slow, resistant, or emotionally distant. The dance between intensity and stability becomes addictive. It isn't only emotional or physical, it's physiological. The nervous system learns to expect the other. The body remembers closeness. Even after separation, the memory of that presence stays. This is why breakups on this axis feel like withdrawal. The loss isn't just emotional, it's felt in the body. The bond between Scorpio and Taurus is a constant negotiation between depth and safety, chaos and calm. It imprints on both soul and body, creating an attachment that lingers long after words, gestures, and even physical proximity fade away. Chapter 7. Why they can't forget each other. Once a Scorpio-Taurus connection is formed, it leaves a mark that's incredibly hard to erase. This isn't sentimental. It isn't about nostalgia or missing someone. It's about the body and mind recognizing a bond that regulated and awakened them in ways no one else ever did. Taurus remembers the feeling of security, the calm that made intensity manageable, the routines and steady presence that made life feel stable yet meaningful. Scorpio remembers depth, the emotional intensity that made stability feel alive, the vulnerability that turned ordinary moments into something profound. Even after separation, both still carry the other as a reference point. Their nervous systems expect it. Their bodies anticipate it. Their minds replay it. This is why Scorpio-Taurus breakups often feel unbearable. It isn't just heartbreak, it's withdrawal. A full recalibration is needed, and that can take months or even years. Attachment on this axis lives both consciously and unconsciously. The mind may say it's time to move on, to replace the connection, to close the chapter, but the body and psyche push back. Even small reminders, a scent, a gesture, a familiar place can reignite recognition. They don't need to see each other to feel the pull. It's stored in memory, energy, and emotion. The connection rises above circumstance. It lasts because it formed at the level of regulation where stability met intensity. No other relationship may ever feel the same, not because it was perfect, not because it lasted, but because it became the blueprint for what attachment, safety, and intensity feel like together. And once that blueprint exists, it can't be erased. For Scorpio and Taurus, the imprint is permanent. It remains long after endings, long after distance, long after time itself has passed. Chapter 8. The shadow side of the axis. The Scorpio-Taurus axis turns destructive when attachment replaces awareness. At its shadow level, both signs begin acting from fear instead of presence. Taurus resists change. What once felt like loyalty slowly becomes rigidity. They hold on longer than is healthy, not because the relationship still feeds them, but because letting go threatens their sense of security. Scorpio senses that resistance and intensifies. What began as depth turns into pressure. Emotional insight becomes testing. Silence becomes a strategy. Control replaces vulnerability. Neither side means to cause harm. Both are trying to protect the bond in the only way they know how. This is where the axis can slip into power struggles. Taurus tightens control through routine expectation and emotional shutdown. Scorpio tightens control through withdrawal, emotional escalation, and psychological influence. The bond grows heavy. At this stage, the connection no longer calms the nervous system. It disrupts it. Taurus feels invaded. Scorpio feels blocked. Resentment builds, yet neither wants to be the one to let go. Ending the bond feels like annihilation. So both remain trapped in patterns that slowly erode trust. This is the danger of this axis when unconscious. The attachment becomes so strong that it overrides self-preservation. Without awareness, love turns into endurance. But the shadow isn't a punishment. It's a signal. This axis demands maturity. It demands emotional responsibility. Both signs must learn that safety cannot come at the cost of autonomy, and depth cannot come at the cost of peace. When Scorpio and Taurus refuse to evolve, the bond consumes them. When they choose awareness, the bond transforms. And that choice decides whether this axis becomes a lifelong foundation or a lesson that needed to end. Chapter 9. When Scorpio and Taurus meet at their highest level. At its highest expression, the Scorpio-Taurus axis is no longer driven by survival. It becomes a matter of choice. Taurus learns that safety doesn't require control, that stability can exist alongside emotional risk. Allowing change doesn't mean losing ground. Scorpio learns that depth doesn't require constant intensity, that intimacy can exist without testing, that peace doesn't weaken connection. When both signs mature, attachment shifts into devotion. Taurus offers a foundation that is flexible rather than rigid. Their consistency becomes a place Scorpio can return to, not something that confines them. They learn how to hold space without gripping too tightly. Scorpio brings depth without disruption. Emotional honesty replaces pressure. Vulnerability replaces power. They learn that trust doesn't have to be built through crisis. In this form, the axis regulates rather than destabilizes. Safety and intensity stop competing and begin supporting each other. The bond becomes steady, deep, and resilient, not because challenges disappear, but because they are no longer feared. This is where Scorpio and Taurus stop reacting to each other and begin consciously choosing each other. The addictive pull softens. What remains is loyalty, emotional honesty, and a shared rhythm that feels sustainable instead of consuming. Few connections reach this level. It requires self-awareness, emotional responsibility, and the willingness to grow beyond instinct. But when it does, this axis creates one of the most enduring bonds in astrology. Not loud, not dramatic, not obsessive, grounded, intimate, and devoted. And unlike its shadow form, this version of the Scorpio-Taurus bond doesn't demand everything at once. It endures. Chapter 10. Who feels this axis most strongly? Not everyone experiences the Scorpio-Taurus axis with the same intensity. This bond becomes most powerful when it activates personal planets or core points in the birth chart. People with Scorpio or Taurus suns often feel the connection right away, but the deeper pull usually comes from the Moon, Venus, Mars, or the ascendant. These placements govern attachment, desire, and instinctive response. Moon contacts are especially potent. When one person's moon falls in Scorpio or Taurus, and the other person activates it, the bond forms at the level of emotional regulation. Comfort, safety, and intensity become tightly woven together. Venus and Mars contacts add strong magnetism and sexual imprinting. These are the placements that make the connection hard to forget, even when it was brief. House overlays matter just as much. When Scorpio and Taurus activate the 2nd and 8th houses, the relationship centers around security, resources, emotional merging, and vulnerability. Pluto aspects intensify everything. Pluto to Venus moon or the ascendant deepens attachment and increases the sense of inevitability. This is where obsession fixation and long-term imprinting tend to appear. Synastry between Scorpio and Taurus doesn't always look dramatic on paper. What gives it power is repetition, tight oppositions, multiple contacts, and the same themes echoing across the chart. This isn't an axis that announces itself loudly. It embeds quietly. People often don't realize how deeply it affected them until they try to move on. And that's the signature of this axis. If you've lived it, you don't need it explained. You recognize it instantly. Closing. The truth about Scorpio and Taurus. Scorpio and Taurus aren't here to teach romance. They teach attachment. They ask whether intensity can exist without control, and whether safety can exist without stagnation. When this axis operates unconsciously, it becomes addictive. When it operates with awareness, it becomes devoted. And the difference between the two is consciousness. If this connection left its mark on you, it wasn't random. It was formative. Some bonds aren't meant to be light. They're meant to quietly and permanently change the way you attach forever.